Tonight, I'd like to introduce Steve Mandel, our guest speaker for this evening. Many of you are already familiar with Steve's multifaceted body of work, especially since this will be the sixth time that he's given a presentation to CODA. Steve has been a science and nature photographer for over 35 years. His early astronomical work used film, and then in 1966, he switched to digital imaging. Many of his images have been used by NASA for their website and publications. He has also designed and built equipment to produce wide field images in the ultra-narrow spectral bands of hydrogen clouds and supernova remnants in the Milky Way galaxy. Steve is a research associate with the Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics at UCSC and is founder of the Deep Space Remote Observatories, a network of remotely operated telescopes in California, Chile, and Australia. I could go on, but as they say, I'm already lost in space. So please welcome Steve. I'm going to stop my screen share.
Well, thank you, and I'm really honored to be invited back so much to this wonderful organization. I know a number of you, and the very first presentation I gave, which goes way back, and it was in there was a basement room, that restaurant right at Pasa Tiempo. They used to have a basement room. That's where the meetings used to be held. And my very first talk was about astrophotography, going way back then. And I've dabbled in a bunch of different things since that time. But I'm kind of come back home after exploring a bunch of different sciences to my love since I was 11 years old when I built my first telescope. And when I talk to people about astrophotography, a lot of people say something like this to me. They say, I remember when I was camping at Yosemite and it was August and it was a moonless night and the Milky Way was so bright and I saw meteors. And I think every one of us has had that kind of experience, where we've had some, felt some connection with the sky and then, events start happening, like this lunar eclipse that's coming up that somebody's going to photograph, which is great. And the comet, that was our recent comet. And there's me on my deck photographing it. And my wife took this picture with her iPhone. So sometimes astrophotography is pretty simple. Sometimes it's not. I'm going to talk about that. But people are often wondering, how do I do this? And how do I get to the next level? And I've gone through the pain of this through all these years to figure this stuff out. And I'm still trying to figure it out. But it is worth pursuing if you're interested. And I'll give you my contact information at the end of my talk tonight, because I'm happy to talk to any of you if you ever have any questions about, how do you do something? How do you pursue it? What equipment is needed and all that kind of thing. So let me just quickly jump in and go back in history here. And this is the second astrophoto ever taken. The first astrophoto was taken by Daguerre himself in about 1815. He took the picture, he showed it to some people, and then it was lost in a fire. And so that disappeared. And the next photo that appeared was this one, taken by a photographer, once again using, it's a daguerreotype, and it was about 1840. And since that time, photographers have been, and scientists have been trying to figure out, how do you photograph the heavens? Because there's obviously so much up there, and then, you can see things through a telescope, and, how do you capture some of these pictures? So I wanted to talk a little about some of the different types of astrophotography and, just some of the very basics. If you're interested in a particular type, like photographing a lunar eclipse, and that's great to hear that someone's offering a workshop in that, because there's, some special little tricks. So, for some of the basic things that you might want to photograph, you've probably seen star trail photos or just pictures of the Milky Way, meteors, comets, constellation shots. You probably already have the equipment for this. You may have attempted some of this with a tripod, a fairly fast lens, wide open or, closed down one stop. And then at around 50 millimeters, I think you cannot exceed about 25 seconds of exposure time. Maybe it's at 35 millimeters. There's a formula online somewhere. I can't remember the formula. And the reason is you can't exceed that is because the Earth is spinning. And so this is a particularly difficult kind of photograph. It's like you're in your car and you're in the passenger seat. Someone else is driving, hopefully, and you point the camera out and you're trying to stay focused on an object, you know, an animal or whatever it is, a tree, as you're driving down the road. You know, you're on a moving platform. And so we have to take that into account. The second thing is that we're trying to photograph often these little pinpoint stars. And what I discovered the hard way is that I thought the infinity mark on my expensive lenses was exactly infinity, and it's not. So when I'm photographing stars, like when I did comet photography, I use the zoom function on my camera. I'd go to 10x zoom and I'd focus from the 10x zoom, and it was not always exactly on that infinity mark. So I first had to find how could I get sharp stars and, you know, not touch the lens after that. And, you know, there's all kinds of different things that go on depending on the lens you have, and even the same brand lens could be a little different. So pay attention to that. So you can do a bunch of stuff with, you know, basic equipment. And over there on the left, you see a camera on a tracking platform. So they make these wonderful little platforms that compensate for the rotation of the Earth. So you can go longer than 25 or 30 seconds if you want to go longer. And those tracking platforms, you know, they're a couple $100. And, you know, they allow you to do, you know, things like some of the larger astronomical objects, like I said, you know, the bright nebula. So if you want to get a picture of the Orion Nebula or the Andromeda Galaxy, which is quite large in the sky, you know, the star trackers are out there, and they're made by a number of different companies. And in the last couple of years, I've seen the rise of automated telescopes. So in the middle there, you see the C-Star S50. And I was pretty blown away by how good the images look coming from these. They will find the object. They will do the tracking. They're pretty great. And I'm probably not supposed to do this, but it's a long story. I have an extra one of these. If anyone is interested, I think they're like $500. This one's unopened in the box, and I'll like discount it $100 if anyone wants to get one. So these C-stars, and you can look them up if you're interested in this, because it can photograph the sun. It has a solar filter. They're quite nice. And then the step up from there is a telescope, and there you see a celestron. That's either an 8-inch diameter or a 9-inch diameter, and it's on an equatorial tracking mount. Can you see my pointer here, my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so these are counterweights to counter the weight on this. And this is pointing right at Polaris. You see the little scope there. So you look through here, this cap comes off and you find Polaris in here. And then the motor drive in here will rotate and keep the object centered fairly accurately. And down here, they all come with remote device. So you can pull this off, a little hand paddle. And if you have it polar aligned, that means that this, whoops, I'm so sorry. On the Apple, the mouse said that. This device will usually have it programmed with a couple thousand objects. So if you want to find the Orion Nebula or the Andromeda Galaxy, you can punch it into that, and it will move the telescope pretty darn close. So depending on the level that you want to get, you go through it. And I tell people, start with the basics. You know, learn what these things are if you want to pursue this, and challenge yourself and, you know, have some fun with it. Because if you don't have any experience and you jump right to a system like the one on the end there with the Celestron telescope, it can be very frustrating because there's a learning curve just like anything else. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different stuff tonight. I'm going to show you what I'm doing. And I'm hoping you will feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. So if you're in the audience there, if you're going to ask a question, you're going to have to get close to the microphone because it is a little hard to hear you. But don't be shy, interrupt me. And if I'm going to answer your question later, I'll ask you to hold the question. But, we can have a conversation and discussion about this. So this is what I'm showing you here is how most people enter astrophotography with one of these systems. Do any of you have any questions so far about what you've seen here? Okay, we will move on. Okay, so this is what happens when you go insane. And here I am. And this is a telescope that is up at a facility in the Sierra Nevadas, up at about 5,000 feet. And this, the big white thing there is an extremely precise tracking platform with software to match. And then the telescope is a 17-inch diameter mirror. And I'll show you photos taken with this. But this is a telescope that is used by some institutions for research. We put cameras on them. I'll talk about the cameras in a little bit. And so I operate, because I've been doing this a long time now, with a buddy of mine, actually with two friends now. I have these observatories that are located at facilities, one in the Sierra Nevadas, a second one with a duplicate telescope that is in the Andes in Chile. That's up around 6,000 feet overlooking the Atacama Desert. And we just installed a third system, not like this one, but it's a little bit smaller. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. And that is located in the southern part of Australia for a specific research project I'll be working on probably, for the next 2 years. I'm working with an astronomer at Columbia on what I think is going to be a major discovery and some unknown objects that are only visible from the southern hemisphere. What else can I tell you about it? The stuff you see here is made by a company. They used to be in Monterey, and they were a small little band, and they moved to Pennsylvania, and it's a plane wave. So they make instruments, telescopes for NASA, for observatories, for just all kinds of research. And they make these that, they're accessible to amateurs. They're not cheap, and you really have to know what you're doing. And even if you know what you're doing, it's very challenging getting these up and running. It took us a couple months to do that, even though my friend Bob and I, who partnered on this, have been at it a very long time. But now we have these ticking away. And keep in mind that the other complication with these telescopes is we're not there pushing the button. We operate these telescopes remotely. And so I can, with software these days, program this telescope to photograph an object or objects all night long, and then go to sleep, turn off the camera, turn off the mount, and hold the data. And then I just go online and download the data. These facilities do have people there. They usually have 1 or 2 people at the facility. So if you have some problem, you can call them and they will go fix it. Usually they don't like to do it at 2 a.m. They like to wait till the daytime, but you do have access to people going out and taking care of the stuff. And they're experts. And of course, you're paying for that service and for being there. They have high-speed internet, like very high-speed internet, backup systems. You could see the roof above. They have cloud sensors. They have rain sensors. They have all kinds of sensors that will close the roof in case of any emergency. And we get constant communication from all the telescopes telling us exactly what's going on. So we know, is the telescope working? Is it not working? Is it cloudy? And these places all have cameras, so we can just go and look in the sky. One night I was looking at the camera that's mounted on the observatory, and I saw the sky in the background. And the guy who owns this one, he lives in a house up on the mountain there. And looked at the image and I realized it was the night when we could see the auroras. Remember, that was some months ago. And I called him and I said, Keith, I'm looking at the camera. Go look out your back window so you can see the aurora. And he said, hold on. And he ran over there and he said, oh my God, you can see the aurora. So he was up in the Sierras there and got to see the aurora. So we have good communication with the cameras and all of this, which is essential because we're operating this, delicate and hard to use equipment. So we've got to have a lot of data. Let's go back to star trails. And when my son Paul, gosh, this is 20 years ago, we went camping up in Big Sur. And I said, hey, let's do some star trail pictures. And so we took a tripod, we took a camera, and you have to learn a little astronomy because right there is Polaris, the North Star. It's not exactly north, but it's close enough. It's the brightest star to where the North Pole is. And we opened the lens. It was probably a 50 millimeter lens, maybe a 35 millimeter. We opened it for 2 hours and just locked it open. And what you see here is the rotation of the Earth. And the Earth, and if you were on the North Pole, this spot would be right overhead. So this tells us the angle that we're at. So it defines we're at 34 degrees here in Santa Cruz, something like that. And you're probably wondering what that dotted line is. That's an airplane going into the San Jose airport. And so flying down the coast. And you put some trees in the foreground and you have a nice picture. I haven't done one that runs longer, but you can get some really interesting shots if you leave the lens open for 6 hours or 8 hours. And then a buddy of mine does time lapse, and here's what he did. Watch this. And so what he did here, you can see there he's slightly defocused for some of the exposures, so they're wider at one end. So you can do all kinds of fun stuff and be creative. And there's YouTube videos and all that that's available for you to look at any time if you want to attempt any of it. And then we get to the moon. So we have this lunar eclipse coming up, and this was photographed with a 400 millimeter telescope, is this a telescope shot? Yeah, this was not with a lens. This was with a telescope, but 400 millimeters of focal length is 400 millimeters of focal length. And so this is the size without cropping that you get. And, when you learned how to expose it correctly and everything's working, you can get some pretty interesting shots and you can capture details. And then if you get a moon map, you can figure out where, the last astronauts landed on the moon, where the moonwalk was and where this spacecraft landed and that spacecraft. And as you look at it, you notice the two big craters there. And the biggest system is this one, Copernicus. And you see all the rays coming out of it. And what those rays are, it's called ejecta. So a meteor or an asteroid smashed into the moon and it ejected material out. And that's what those lines are that you see across the moon. And then just looking through a telescope, you can see all kinds of wonderful features, on the moon. And we only see this side, right? We never see the back side of the moon. So no one knew it was on the back side until a Russian spacecraft orbited the moon, and they were the first to photograph the backside of the moon. And because they were the first to photograph it, they got to name all of the craters on the backside of the moon. So all of the craters on the backside of the moon have Russian names, except for 3 of the craters, which were named after the 3 astronauts who were tragically killed in an accident at Cape Canaveral. I don't know if you remember this. It was back in the 70s, I think. So 3 of them were killed in this accident, and they named 3 of the craters after those astronauts, which was very nice of them. But everything else has a Russian name on the backside of the moon. Okay, so we've had all these great solar eclipses. This one I shot in Oregon, and this requires some lenses, but the sun and the moon are pretty darn bright. which is nice because as photographers, we love light because it helps us. And so here, if you know a little about the science and what's going on, at totality, you can see the corona, which is the solar atmosphere, which is very interesting and not well understood phenomenon with stuff coming off the sun. And we are, July of this year will be solar maximum. So the sun goes in 11-year cycles of activity, and we are approaching the maximum activity. That's why we've had these auroras. We might very well get auroras this year and next year and the year after, just because the sun is in its most active state right now. There's a lot of sunspots and all kinds of stuff happening. All right. This was a partial solar eclipse that we had here in Santa Cruz. And this was the one that went through the U.S. So if you went to Texas or the Northeast, and some of you may have gone to see the total eclipse, but I didn't want to travel. And I walked out into my front lawn. I set up, a camera and a lens, and it was partially cloudy. So I wanted to say on like for lunar eclipses or solar eclipses, don't forget wide angle, because what we all want to do is bring out our big lenses and zoom in. But I was able to get this photo with the tonality because the light, got dim, and sometimes there's interesting surroundings, or you can frame the partially eclipsed moon or partially eclipsed sun, with clouds or trees. So as you're thinking about how you're going to photograph it, don't just use your biggest lens. Think about using wider angle lenses also. And here's our famous comet. This is from my deck. I live up in the hills in SoCal a little bit. And this was so amazing to be able to take this image. This was at my camera on a tripod, and I think I was using a 135 millimeter lens, for a couple seconds. It was so darn bright. It was just mind-boggling. And the other thing that it's the first time, and I've been looking at comets for 40 years, 45 years, longer than that. And it was the very first time, a naked eye, I've seen the anti-tail. So this is, you see this coming off here, that's the anti-tail. And it's really not an anti-tail. It is the ion tail. And because of the geometry of where we are and the position of the comet, etc., it looks like it's coming straight off the comet, but it's actually going back, if you will, that to our eye, and because, like I said, the geometry of everything, it looks like it's coming off the front. And comets, the brightest part of the tail is always pointing away from the sun because it's solar particles, solar energy that it does two things to a comet. It melts the ice. And so all comets have two tails. Sometimes they say two tails to tell. And one of the tails they tell is the solar particles hit this and ionize it. In other words, they're knocking electrons off atoms. And so you get an ion tail, but it also melts the ice and dust is released. So the white, brighter tail is dust, and that is reflecting sunlight. You really can't see it in this photo. The ion tail is often color and usually blue or green, and you get a lot of blue and green in comets because oxygen, when it gets ionized, it fluoresces at the blue-green part of the spectrum. So comets can be quite beautiful, but keep in mind all comets have two tails. All right, so here is a picture of comet, the famous one from years ago, Hale-Bopp. Remember Hale-Bopp, and there was, tragic suicides around it. And I went out, it was in April back in the 80s or early 90s, and I went about 100 miles out into the desert outside of Las Vegas and set up a special astronomical camera. And here you can see very clearly the blue ion tail. So that is fluorescing from the energy of solar particles. And then the yellowish dust tail that is reflecting sunlight coming off this magnificent comet. And out in the desert, because it was a moonless night and we were, away from the city. This thing was so bright, and you could see both tails, that we watched it sink below the horizon, and it looked like car headlights coming over a hill because we could see the two tails coming up as it set. So this was a wonderful comet, and every once in a while they come into view. Like, we were just surprised. Right now, if you were in the southern hemisphere, you'd be seeing a magnificent comet. We're probably not going to see it here in the northern hemisphere. So these make wonderful objects for photography, and they're pretty accessible. Here I was using specialized equipment to get an image like this, but you can capture this with all kinds of things, all kinds of ways. Here's once again another comet. This is from I think the 80s or 90s also, and this was a comet named Hyakutake, named after the Japanese discoverer. And you can see this is a ionization field as the solar wind hits the comet. It's ionizing oxygen. And what's happening here is I was actually tracking this comet with my telescope. And so I wasn't tracking on the stars, I was tracking on the comet. And so the Earth was turning, but I kept the telescope focused right on the pinpoint head of the comet so I could get a longer exposure, capture some of this beautiful detail. But that would mean the stars are trailed because the Earth is turning while I'm photographing. So is this making sense so far? Is this okay? Any questions? Just checking in. We're good? Okay. So these are my former home observatories, and my dog who would come out with me at night, that's Goldie. Goldie passed away some years ago. But I had a roll-off roof observatory here with the telescope, and then I had another little dome in my backyard that had a big refractor that it looked through the end, and that was kind of fun. Weather station up here, and this was at the back end of our property. And that was really a lot of fun. But the problem was, as I got more and more into this, that of course, we're only up at about 750 feet. And so we get fog and moisture coming in, and it started to damage the lenses because the coatings on the lenses for telescopes are very sensitive. So, eventually I closed these down and decided to move telescope. I went to a facility up in New Mexico some years ago, which was up around 8,500 feet in the mountains above the desert there. And so this is my old dog Goldie, and here I am with my present dog Lily. So Lily doesn't go out to the observatory, but she's a great dog. Had to get a picture of her. So I back in the old days, I was trying to stay in the house and do precision focus. So I rigged up a servo motor with a belt drive to, I think this is a 180 millimeter lens. And this is a special astronomical camera, kind of around late 90s, early 2000s. It's called the CCD camera, which stands for Charged Coupled Device. They are scientific grade chips in there, and I could focus the lens remotely. So I'm looking at the output of this camera on a computer screen, and that would allow me to focus. And I was getting this set up here, and I brought it to New Mexico because I just connected it to a computer there on the old Windows system, remote access. That was the only thing that ever worked on like Windows 7. And it worked pretty darn well. So I had a computer here and a computer there, and I could connect to that, and I could focus this lens. So this is my present observatory. So this is in my driveway. And the only kind of photography I do now from home is solar imaging. So if it's a nice clear morning, these are two different solar telescopes. And you can see a close-up here. They're just a different size scopes. They're made by a company in Arizona. And you can see from the older equipment how much more sophisticated things are. This is a dedicated astronomical computer and power unit. And I've got all kinds of devices on here. Now, I don't have the cameras mounted on here. So this one was set up for visual use. And these are designed 100% to look at the sun. So they have all these safeguard that are built in that you can't remove them. And it allows you to see incredible detail on the surface of the sun, which right now is very, very interesting, of course, because the sun is at a very, very active stage. So, and this is my third solar telescope, which is a handmade telescope by a friend in Illinois. So I have all these solar scopes at home. And if you're thinking of coming to my house and robbing my telescopes, I just want to warn you, I keep a guard kitty around at all times. And so this is on my security camera.
Oh, how cool.
That is a mountain lion.
Yeah.
At about 3 in the morning on patrol on my property. We see them up here. I've never seen one alive, but there he is walking by on patrol. Okay, so here's one of my solar images. And by the way, here's the approximate size of the Earth compared to this. So with these telescopes, you can get incredible images. This is called a prominence, the big thing that's coming off here. And these are spicules. And here you can see this is plasma, what this is. So without going into a long talk about solar physics, I get images like this, and I get images that look like this. This is a black and white, not colorized image, because all the scientific redshifts are black and white. And you can see the magnetic lines of flux that move this plasma around your sunspots. But when you look close, you start to see this incredible detail in the sunspot. So the sun is quite fascinating, and it's its own subject. Oops, there we go. So here is a telescope that I did have at my house, and you can piggyback a system here. Once again, a CCD camera. There's a monitor if I'm sitting in there, and you can see you got to learn a lot of stuff to figure all this out. And then I always had my little gnome sitting up here for good luck. And with this telescope, this is also up at New Mexico. So here's the camera lens, and you see this device I was testing out. I had it on a camera lens here. And you don't always need big telescopes. With this telescope, I actually made a discovery. I won an international award for amateur astronomers for the work I did. I was a co-author on a bunch of academic papers for very difficult to see, never before adequately photographed dust clouds. And so that was quite exciting for an amateur. And I worked with a professional team for a number of years looking at this stuff. And here's what I discovered. And it's purple because this dust in here is emitting light. It's fluorescing simultaneously in the red and the blue. So if you combine red and blue, you get purple. And that's what this came out. And I thought it was a mistake, but no, I had found these dust clouds, and all the stars you see, they're in the foreground. This dust sits at the very outer edge of our galaxy. So it's like you're looking through a spotted window with something way in the distance. And the distance is the nebulosity out there. Okay, here's our telescope in Australia, and that's my friend. His name is also Steve. He lives in Melbourne, and he's such a genius helping us set this up. I sent him a Superman t-shirt as I was shipping equipment down to him. And so he just set this stuff up. And in the next photo, you can see, I call it the spy camera, but with this, we can watch the telescope. So I can log into that camera and see the sky and watch the telescope move. So that's kind of fun. And here's the mount that tracks the sky. And then this is really two systems. So we have this telescope right here and a guide camera. I'm not going to go into all the details, but you have to keep this system precisely on a star. And there's a camera here with a filter system. And so with the filter system, I can look at a particular wavelength of light. So if I know hydrogen is up there, I have a filter that only shows me light emitted by hydrogen. Or if I want to look at a sulfur cloud, and I can remotely rotate these filters. And then I can rotate the whole camera, because just like when we're out doing landscape photography, we want to compose. And up here, I have a 135 millimeter lens with a filter wheel and another camera. And this is giving us very wide field views of an area of the sky that we already got proof of this, contains a relatively unknown, a very large complex of hydrogen gas. And so I'm working, so this system is dedicated to this research with this astronomer at Columbia that I mentioned. Here we're setting up the telescope. This is the one in Sierras and Chile. That's my friend Bob that I partner with on this stuff. This is the facility in Chile and this is our telescope there. You can see the camera and just fans to circulate the air and dedicated computer. And then it just goes on, all the subsystems. We're back in the Sierras here with the observatory doggy. And this is kind of fun. This is our spy camera up in the Sierras. And I'm going to just speed this along because you can watch the camera rotate. And we were doing a quick alignment. So you look at different positions, the camera is measuring it, and we can rotate and point this. And if you see whoops, wrong way. If you watch up here, you'll see a satellite moving through the sky as I move this along. See that satellite?
Yes.
There it is. Okay. And this is the facility in Chile, and there's no light on. This was a full moon, and the roof was open, and there's the high Andes in the background. So we're up at 6,000 feet. There was no snow. This is moonlight. Whoops, I'm so sorry. Moonlight illustration. Okay, so this is a log of shots. So when we photograph stuff, typically we will photograph for one astronomical object somewhere between 20 and 60 hours of exposures. The exposures are about 15 minutes long. So the object was NGC 1961, which is a galaxy. We had the green filter, the luminance or clear filter, red, blue shots. And so we end up with all these massive files that we have to download. And this is the result of what we get with these big telescopes, because this is a nova, and the red is hydrogen gas. The blue is ionized oxygen. And we wouldn't be able to see this without these specialized filters that we have. So that's the beauty of having they're called narrowband filters. You know, most of the camera, like my Canon camera, right, or your phone, the pixels have filters on them. There's red, green, and blue. But astronomical cameras and scientific imaging equipment is black and white. There's no filters on it. We're trying to get a lot of data. We have to pass the filters we want in front of it in order to get images like this. And so this image, which what do we do here? Oh, we had, you can see the different filters, blue, green. We used the hydrogen, alpha, oxygen 3, red, 3 hours, 10 hours, 10 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours of 15-minute exposures, and then specialized software to put these together. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's crazy. But you get interesting pictures. So here's a photo I took of the Veil Nebula in the summer, and this was used by NASA for 10 years in some of their literature. And here is a gas cloud where we use what's called the Hubble palette, because once again, they're black and white, and all the Hubble pictures you've seen have assigned colors. So you assign blue to oxygen, yellow to sulfur, so on and so forth. And the Hubble palette uses the same colors and same filters to produce images that are pleasing to the eye. And then you get objects like this. Yeah, question?
No, just your 5-minute warning.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I'll kind of speed through this. You can see a number of objects that we've taken. This is from Chile with these big telescopes. We get close in, we get weird stuff, bubbles in space, gas clouds, you know, just all this stuff. And it's fantastic, the things you see. They're unimaginable. And, you know, after you expose something for 40 hours, you start picking up detail that you've never seen before. Oh, there's Mars, of course. And these were unknown. This is the second photograph ever taken of these little objects. I'm just kind of skipping through so you can see these are dust clouds and reflection. This is reflection nebula. It's refracting the blue light in the same way the atmosphere, particles in the atmosphere refract sunlight, and we see blue because of the wavelength that gets refracted. This is a unusual galaxy, another galaxy. So we get some really fun stuff, and you know, where this is kind of the far edge of the hobby. This is a star stream. So we did this one for research for astronomers looking at that. So on March 25th, which is Tuesday night at the Rio Theater, my wife and I, for a number of years, have sponsored an astronomy lecture by a famous astronomer. And if you remember the Hubble deep field image back in the 90s, they pointed the Hubble telescope at a blank spot in space, and no one, and this was the guy who did it, came up with the idea. People said, "You're crazy. Why are you doing that?" He was the boss. He said, "They gave me 10 days. I'm pointing it at nothing." And we got back the picture. It's filled with thousands of unknown galaxies. And so I'm fortunate that I know Bob. I've been friends with him for about 10 years now. And you are all invited March 25th, 7:30 at the Rio Theater. It's free. Just be there and get a good seat. He's a great speaker. I'll be giving a short talk. I did an amateur deep field project with my buddies around the globe. We focused and got pictures of deep space in honor of what Bob did. So it'll be really interesting if any of you are interested. There you go. You've got that. And let's see. Oh, here's our deep field. So you see the few bright stars here. You see all the faint little white dots back there? Those are not stars. Those are galaxies. And I've already checked in the survey data. Some of the galaxies here are a couple. Well, there's one that's up here that is the light left there over 11 billion light years ago. So these are some very old galaxies, very distant galaxies we picked up. And so we'll be talking about this. Oh, here we go. So this one's 11.4. There it is. That guy up there. This is, I've worked with some astronomers to identify some of these things. This one's only 842 million light years away, this guy. So really, I mean, it's just like mind-boggling stuff. It's amazing. And you are the first people to see this. My wife has seen this and two other people. I said, I'm going to try to get the deepest quasar that's ever been imaged by amateur astronomers. And there it is right there. I've had two astronomers verify that we captured it. And this is, the light left that little galaxy 13 billion years ago. The sun's only 5 billion years old. So it was more than twice the time before the sun was even thinking about becoming a star. So there's all kinds of cool stuff. You can contribute to science, and it's a lot of fun. So if you want, take a screenshot of this, or, you know, you can get my information from, you know, any of the guys, Kevin or, you know, Mark or anybody. I'm happy to, you know, you just call me. I'm very informal. Call me in the evening, call me during the day. I'm retired. You can text me. That's my cell number, my email address. Our astronomy images can be found here at this website, place called Astrobin. And that's my talk. So any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Amazing work. Just amazing. Any
Thanks.
I'm amazed that you can actually you manipulate these huge telescopes from anywhere, you know, they're all over the world, I guess. I mean, Australia and where,
Yeah.
you know,
It's just crazy. what can be done now with the technology and the software.
Yeah.
And a lot of people involved in this are, software engineers and have a background in that, and they write software, and it's become a big thing. Each of the facilities. I'm sorry?
You rent the space? I mean, I noticed there were other telescopes there.
Yep. You rent the space, and the facility in the Sierras and the facility in Chile each have over 100 telescopes. They have multiple buildings. There's many telescopes, a lot of government institutions, universities. NASA has telescopes at both of those, smaller telescopes that they're using to monitor, asteroids that might destroy the Earth, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all remotely operated.
That's cool.
So, Steve, I'm curious. I used to live in New Mexico. Where in New Mexico were your facility?
Up right above Cloudcroft. The ski resort up at Cloudcroft. Yep. So Cloudcroft, and there's a valley there, and then mountains around it. So we were right in Cloudcroft.
Thank you.
So, Steve, you mentioned that this is all amateur. Does that mean that all the funding comes from you personally?
Yes. So all of this comes out of our pocket.
Wow.
Thanks to our generous partners who allow us to spend the money doing this. So I'm retired, and I know guys who have boats in the Santa Cruz Yacht Harbor that cost more than my telescope. And I know people who they're into cars, so they go buy expensive cars, or whatever you're into. So I'm very fortunate. I ran a consulting company, and I worked internationally for many years, and did well enough that I'm able to, with my partners, put together these instruments. The one in Chile, we didn't have to import it. Fortunately, it was someone had the telescope there, one of the owners. So we bought his telescope, because to get a telescope to Chile, you pay a 30% duty. That Trump thinks he's charging a lot. Well, the Chilean government charges 30%. So you have to document the value. You can't. So we got one that was there. So that really worked out. And we bought a couple pieces of used equipment to put the one in the Sierras. The telescope was new, but some of the other stuff was used. But it depends how much you love it, and do you know how to operate this stuff at that level? And if you do, you get the kind of results that we do, and you can do research. And it's, for me, it's like it's a dream come true.
Well, congratulations, my friend. I'm impressed.
Yeah, very stunning work, Steve. Thank you so much.
You had a question. There's a question there.
Well, we actually need to move on to the next segment. But so thanks so much for your presentation, Steve. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.